And I would argue that it has something to do with the loss of history, has something to do with what Studs Terkel called national amnesia. Either the forgetting of history or the learning of bad history. The learning of the kind of history that you do get of Columbus is a hero, and Teddy Roosevelt is a hero, and Andrew Jackson is a hero, and all these guys who are presidents and generals and industrialists and so on, they are the people who made America great. And America has always done good things in the world, and we have had our little problems, of course. Lots slavery, for instance, you know, but we overcome them, you know, and you know, not that kind of history. If the American people really knew history, if they learned history, if the educational institutions did their job, if the press did its job in giving people historical perspective, then people would understand. When the president gets up before the microphone and says, we must go to war for this or for that, for liberty or for democracy, or because we're in danger and so on, if people had some history behind them, they would know how many times presidents have announced to the nation, we must go to war for this reason or that reason. They would know that President Polk said, oh, we must go to war against Mexico because, well, there was an incident that took place on the border there, and we, you know, our honor demands that we go to war. They would know, if they knew some history, how President McKinley took the nation into war against Spain and Cuba, saying, well, we're going in to liberate the Cubans from Spanish control. And in fact, there's a little bit of truth to that. We did go in, we fought against Spain, we got Spain out of Cuba, we liberated them from Spain, but not from ourselves. And so Spain was out and United Fruit was in. And then the American banks and the American corporations were in. And if people knew their history, they would know, you know, that President McKinley said, when as an American army was already in the Philippines and the American Navy was already in the Philippines, and Theodore Roosevelt, one of our great presidential heroes, was lusting for war, then people would know that McKinley, who did not know where the Philippines were. But very often our presidents need to be briefed and told where something is. You know, George Bush, this is where Iraq is. You know, Lyndon Johnson, this is where the Gulf of Tonkin is. You know, they need it. They would know, if they knew the history, that President McKinley said, we're going into the Philippines to civilize and Christianize the Filipinos. And if they knew their history, if the history books spent some time on the war in the Philippines in the early part of the 20th century, instead of, as history books do, they spent a lot of time on the Spanish-American War, which just lasted 3 months. They spent virtually no time on the war in the Philippines, a bloody war which lasted, 7 years, and which involved massacres and the extermination of populations. That history doesn't appear. We civilized and Christianized the Filipinos and established our control. They would know if they heard the president say, we are going to bring democracy to the Middle East. They would know how many times we brought democracy to other countries that we invaded. They would know if we brought democracy to Chile when we overthrew a democratically elected government in Chile in 1973. They would know how we brought democracy to Guatemala when we overthrew, again, a democratically elected. We love democratic elections. We love free elections, except when they go the wrong way. And then we send either our army in or the CIA in or our secret agents in to overthrow the government. If people knew that history, they would never for a moment believe President Bush when he says, we're going into Iraq, because of this reason and that reason and liberty and democracy and their threat, I mean, it takes some historical understanding to be skeptical of the things that authorities tell you. When you know history, you know that governments lie. As I.F. Stone said, governments lie all the time. Oh, not just the American government. It's just in the nature of governments. Well, they have to lie. I mean, governments in general do not represent the people of the societies that they govern. And since they don't represent the people, and so since they act against the interests of the people, the only way they can hold power is if they lie to the people. If they told people the truth, they wouldn't last very long. So history can help in understanding deception, in being skeptical, and not rushing to embrace whatever the government tells you. And if you know some history, you would understand something which is even more basic, perhaps, than the question of lying about this war, or lying about this invasion, lying about this intervention. Something more basic, if you knew some history, you would understand a sort of fundamental fact about society, and including our society, that the interests of the government and the interests of the people are not the same. It's very important to know this because the culture tries very hard to persuade us that we all have a common interest. If they use the language, national interest. There's no national interest. There's their interest and our interest. National security, no. Whose security? National defense, whose defense? All these words and phrases are used to try to encircle us all into a nice big bond, so that we will assume that the people who are the leaders of our country have our interests at heart. Very important to understand, no, they do not have our interests at heart. You will hear a young fellow who is going off to Iraq. And I remember hearing the same thing when the young fellow went off to Vietnam. And a reporter goes up to the young fellow and says, young man, you're going off, and what are your thoughts, and why are you doing this? And the young man says, I'm doing this for my country. No, he's not doing it for his country. And now she's not doing it for her country. The people go off, well, I'm not fighting for their country. No, they're not doing their country any good. They're not doing their families any good. They're certainly not doing the people over there any good. But they're not doing it for their country. They're doing it for their government. They're doing it for Bush. That would be a more accurate thing to say. I'm going off to fight for George Bush. I'm going off to fight for Cheney. I'm going off to fight for Rumsfeld. I'm going off to fight for Halliburton. That would be telling the truth. And in fact, to know the history of this country is to know that we have had conflict of interest in this country from the very beginning, between the people in authority and the ordinary people. We are not one big happy family that fought the American Revolution against England. I remember, in school, that's how it seemed. They're the patriots, and there's all of us working, fighting together at Valley Forge and Bunker Hill and so on, against the Redcoats and the British and so on. It wasn't that way at all. It wasn't a united country. A very large part of the population did not believe in the war. Washington had to send generals down south to use violence against young people to force them into military service. Soldiers in the Revolutionary Army mutinied against Washington, against the officers, because there was class conflict in the army, just as there had been class conflict all through the colonies before the Revolutionary War. Well, anybody who knows the military, anybody who's been in the military knows that the military is a class society. There are the privates and there are the officers, And in the Revolutionary War, the privates were not getting shoes, and they were not getting clothes, and they were not getting food, and they were not getting paid, and the officers were living high in resplendence, and so they mutinied, thousands of them. I don't remember ever learning about that when I studied history in school, because the myth comes down, oh, we're all one big happy family. You mean including the black slaves? You mean including the Native Americans whose land we were taking from them mile by mile by mile by mile? We're all one big happy family. The women who are left out of all of this, no. Very important to understand that fundamental fact. Those people who run the country and we, our interests are not the same.